What's up, everyone? Aaron Nagler here for PackersNews.com, live on Facebook after the Packers dropped 31-24 to the Carolina Panthers here in Charlotte, Bank of America Stadium, essentially, not completely, but essentially ending their postseason hopes. Obviously, a little bit left to play out, most importantly, the game between the Falcons and the Bucs tomorrow night, but for all intents and purposes, the Packers season has pretty much come to a close. Aaron Rodgers is clearly not himself, clearly off, rusty, whatever you want to call it. He admitted as much in his post-game press conference. And as much as, it is odd to see Rodgers throwing 3 interceptions, the Packers were in this game right until the end, until a fumble by Geronimo Allison, who obviously was only playing because Davante Adams was knocked out from another game with a clearly vicious, dirty hit. Rodgers was pretty tight-lipped after the game when asked about it. Didn't want to get into it, but he did say Davis is a repeat offender and he expects the league to merit out punishment accordingly. Mike starts us off with, we need to hire a new defensive coordinator. It's hard to argue with that when they've given up 31 points. However, they did have a number of big-time stops. They only gave up points off of one of Rodgers' 3 turnovers. And they made a big stop, down 14 points to keep them in the game, to bring it to 7. But all of that said, I don't think the Packers will move on from Capers. I really don't, because that's Mike McCarthy's call. And I think Mike McCarthy's argument would be he needs better players. When you're running Josh Hawkins out there as your number 2 corner and you're zoning it up, or you've got Josh Jones, a rookie who's still completely swimming in and over his head at safety, and they're giving up big play after big play, it's pretty clear that, your players are not up to snuff. Now, that said, Capers has come out week after week and had his lunch handed to him early on in these games. And he does adjust, and they do make adjustments, and his defense does seem to tighten up. But that doesn't stop them from putting the Packers in a big hole. So there are a lot of layers there, and I understand the calls for Capers' job. I don't think it's coming, though. Like I said, I think that's McCarthy's call, and I don't think McCarthy's going to do anything there. But we will see. Clouding everything is McCarthy's contract status. He has 1 year left on his deal heading into next season. Hard for me to see him cutting Capers loose going into his lame duck year, if it is indeed a lame duck, but we'll see. Bench the starters, says someone. Well, the only thing that really kind of is of interest there is will Aaron Rodgers play next week, especially if they are eliminated from playoff contention. Reading between the lines from both McCarthy and Rodgers, we were asked that, and they said, well, we're not there to talk about it yet. We're going to talk about the game here today. But both McCarthy and Rodgers had the intent to play him on Sunday, next Saturday against the Vikings. I'm pretty sure both would have come out and said, yes, absolutely, I'm the starting quarterback. He's the starting quarterback. He's going to play. But neither one of them said that. Both of them kind of punted on the question, which leads me to believe that they will indeed shut him down if and when they are eliminated from playoff contention. Aaron, you said Capers was for sure fired. Well, Bill, that was earlier in the year, and that's why you always let it play out. The longer I stick around, the longer you watch the season play out, it's hard for me to see McCarthy pulling the trigger. I will not watch this. Good idea, Glenn. That's it. Time to get rid of Thompson. He is not getting good players. Now, what? He's not getting good players? Davante Adams isn't a good player. David Bakhtiari isn't a good player. Kenny Clark isn't a good player. Hell, Aaron Rodgers isn't a good player. The list goes on. The 2 rookie running backs aren't good players. I can go down the list of all the good players he's drafted. Now, has he done a poor job augmenting that roster throughout a season or throughout, a few years as far as free agency? Sure. Has he let guys walk that he probably shouldn't have? Absolutely. But to say he is not getting good players, that's a little general and a little silly. They should all get fired, says Stella. Stella's in here to whoop them into shape. After Adams got hot, other than a little from Cobb, nothing from the wide receivers. Well, Jordy Nelson made a few plays, but he wasn't a big factor in the game, that is for sure. Lorenzo, that defense is horrible. Just sit Rodgers until next year. They may do just that. Why can't officials hand out ejections for these calls? Well, they probably should. It's no surprise that Davis wasn't ejected just because the NFL doesn't have a targeting rule. But with that said, I was a little surprised that he wasn't ejected simply because it was a clearly vicious helmet-to-helmet hit. He clearly went for his head. There's no place in the game for that. Can you please rationalize why Clay Matthews is still on the roster? Because he's highly athletic and a really good football player. He had a bad game today, there's no doubt about that. But he's played really good football this season. And though it may not show up on SportsCenter, down in and down out, he is still one of their most talented players on the defensive side of the ball. I know, low bar. I see your responses coming, people. But that said, he gives them way more than what would be indicated on this, on the stat sheet. Now that said, heading into next year, his salary is an issue. There's no doubt about that, and they will have to do something about that. But he absolutely should be on the team. Davis should have been ejected. Instead, he got to stay in and make huge plays. I tend to agree. We played decent. We played a 9-4 team. The defense didn't play that great, but we had chances on offense. And that's the thing. I think it comes down to if Aaron Rodgers is even close to 100%, I think this is probably a Packers win that we're talking about. But Rodgers was clearly rusty, clearly made a number of ill-advised throws that he usually makes in his sleep. He basically took 2 touchdowns off the board and gave the ball to Carolina on 2 of those underthrows, one to Adams and one to Nelson. Both times the wide receiver is behind the defense. Both times Rodgers sees it late. On a normal day, I think Rodgers probably hits those, but today it's clear he just didn't have it. Ted Thompson has devalued the linebacker position over the years. Well, somewhat, definitely. He's definitely devalued the inside linebacker spot. There's no question there. He paid a pretty penny for Nick Perry. Say that 5 times fast. But Perry's output this year has clearly been less than desired. Can we get Rex Ryan as a defensive coordinator? They probably could, but I have a hard time seeing him leaving the booth, or not the booth, but the studio. I mean, that's a cushy life where you just have to show up a couple times a week, talk football, and then leave, as opposed to the coaching life where you're grinding, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, except for maybe like a week or 2 off in late June. That seems like a tough trade-off once you're out of it, but you never know. Let's see. Defense needs an overhaul, allowing way too many big plays for points. Steven, I tend to agree there. As far as what the overhaul needs to be, I keep coming back to Ted Thompson and the personnel that he provides to Dom Capers. Now, Dom Capers is not without blame and not without fault, and he does have his weaknesses that teams take advantage of. But week in and week out, you see how he's left with less than desirable components to work with as far as how to operate his defense successfully. Now, that said, his inability or refusal to simplify things. I mean, once again today we saw fire drill after fire drill on the defensive side of the ball with guys trying to figure out where to line up. At some point, doesn't the defensive coordinator have to simplify it and let the guys make plays rather than just forcing this scheme on them that is clearly confusing and giving them trouble week after week after week? So that's where I struggle. I mean, I understand the calls for fire Capers. I get all that, but he also needs some players. When you're running out a bunch of undrafted free agents in the secondary outside of Demarius Randall, it's hard. Sad that the Panthers got that 1 touchdown. No way. Man, I don't know this league anymore. Last week in this very building, heck, it may have been in that actual end zone, Adam Thielen had a catch almost exactly like that was ruled incomplete. But this week, that same catch gets ruled complete. Now, I know the argument is his butt cheek, I guess, was half in the field of play, but doesn't that mean that the other cheek is out of play? I don't know. Man, it's the NFL. Touchdown Seahawks, that's all I can say. Do we need Atlanta to lose to stay in the playoff hunt? Correct. You do. And they play the Buccaneers, who are terrible. So it'll take a minor miracle for that to happen. We don't go after big-name free agents on defense. A.J. Bouye, I know he would have absolutely helped this defense this year. There is no doubt about that. Now, obviously, Thompson is all about his guys, all about drafting and keeping his dudes in-house. And big signings like that, which, A.J. signed for a whole lot of money, that tips the balance sheet and makes things really interesting and really hard when you're trying to sign Aaron Rodgers to the biggest contract ever signed in the history of the league, which is undoubtedly going to happen this offseason. So while, teams paying that big money that first week of free agency is nice to read about and it gets fan bases excited, in the Packers, kind of state, it's hard to make those moves. Fire Caper, says Jonathan. Original. Retain 42. Great question, Matt. I think it really depends on his asking price. I tend to think Josh Jones was drafted with the idea that he would replace Morgan Burnett eventually. Now, is that going to be this year, this offseason? I don't know. Aaron Jones had 3 touches. Unacceptable. Molly, we asked Rodgers about that, and there were definitely times where, there was an RPO on or there was some kind of check with me at the line where, the calls from the sideline were to get Jones involved, but what the defense was showing indicated that Rodgers went someplace else or dictated that he goes someplace else. So he did say, the plan was to get him more touches. They just ended up going away from it a little bit more than expected. Now that said, Rodgers also went on to say he's a talented guy, he's a really great runner, and they have to get the ball to him more. So that's the balancing act. Pats win with mediocre players on defense, but Pat can't. It's coaching, period. Okay. Never mind that they run completely different schemes, but okay. How many more concussions can Adams take? Roger, that's a really good question. And you have to wonder if that's going to affect his negotiations with either the Packers or another team out there if he hits free agency. I mean, he's starting to get into that territory where, it's just going to take one hit to knock him out for the rest of the season. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he even comes back this year. If I'm Devontae Adams, I'm out. I'm done. I've proved my worth. I know you've shown what you can do with Rodgers and without him. I absolutely shut it down for the rest of the year. Hundley might have won this game. Aaron wasn't ready. That's not as crazy a statement as I think maybe some might think. Rodgers was definitely rusty, and he said as much. It wasn't up to his standard. I'm not so sure you can automatically say they would have won it with Hundley. The game plan definitely would have been different. The approach definitely would have been different. But, maybe the outcome had been different. It's possible. Is that hit on Adams grounds for suspension? Yes, Lindsay. Especially since he's a repeat offender, as Aaron Rodgers pointed out after the game. You can bet Davis will miss next week. Got rid of Casey Hayward and Micah Hyde for what? Well, the Casey Hayward decision, I understand that decision. Now, he's gone on and he's balled out in San Diego. There's no doubt about that. But as things were at the time, given the context, I understood that decision. The Micah Hyde decision, I'll never understand that, to not even offer him a contract. That one mystifies me because he was the quintessential draft and develop, get better each year, play his best ball down the stretch last year, practically save them and help get them into the playoffs, and then you don't even make him an offer. That's just weird to me. We haven't had a top 10 draft pick since A.J. Hawk. That is correct. Although, they had a top 10 draft pick with Jamal Reynolds. It's, just having a top 10 pick doesn't guarantee you anything. If Adams was in, he would have gotten that ball, not Allison. Correct, Mike. Does Rodgers play next week? Laura, great question. We asked both McCarthy and Rodgers, and reading between the lines, neither one of them said it, but reading between the lines, yes. If the Falcons win tomorrow night and the Packers are eliminated from the playoffs, I think they shut Rodgers down. Giving up on the run was a problem today. I agree, Larry, but you got to remember that's not just McCarthy. That is Rodgers as well. I asked Rodgers after the game if he had full control of the line of scrimmage like he always does, and he indicated that he did. So a lot of that is RPOs, which is a run-pass option. Check with me's at the line of scrimmage where Rodgers looks at the defense and then makes the call. That's not just McCarthy. That is both he and Rodgers. The safety group all of a sudden looks average at best. Yeah, it's funny how deep and talented they looked this summer and even to start the year. But HaHa Glendix has definitely taken a step back. There's no doubt about that. Morgan Burnett was actually playing really good football until he got hurt. And he hasn't been the same since coming back from injury. And then obviously they lost Kentrell Bryce, who actually didn't look great at the start of the year. And then Marwin Evans has lost, ground to Jermaine Whitehead. But none of those names scare you if you're an offensive coordinator. There's no doubt about that. Has the organization become arrogant because of Rodgers masking all of the flaws? It's a good question. I think there's a case to be made that people got complacent over the last couple of years. Ted Thompson even said as much this offseason when he twice indicated, he said the words, the roster got a little bit stale, and that's on me. So that is Ted Thompson taking ownership of it. But, arrogant, maybe, I guess. I know people have accused Thompson of that a number of times over his tenure. He just has a way that he believes in, and you may not agree with it, you may point out its flaws, but it's what he believes and it's how he wants to build his team and his roster, and Mark Murphy has given him all of the latitude in the world to make that call and those calls. So you can call Thompson arrogant, and that's fine, but that arrogant guy is the one making the calls on the football side of things at 1265 Lombardi. And until his contract is up after the 2018 draft or Mark Murphy decides to step in, that's the way it's going to be in Green Bay. Daniels was great until injury as well. Well, Gary was hurt in the first game, so he still does a lot that doesn't show up in the stat sheets. He still does a whole lot that you see on tape after you watch the games. Takes on a lot of double teams, works through a lot of trash. He hasn't been the impact player probably that they were hoping for this season, but he still does a lot of grunt work that goes unnoticed. Is there a chance the front office and coaching changes this offseason? There's a chance, but I doubt anything happens. I think the Packers will sign Thompson and McCarthy to extensions, and then it'll be up to McCarthy whether he wants to keep Capers or not. And I think that's probably a 50-50 at best proposition. Late to the party here, Aaron, but what did McCarthy say about the lack of touches by Jones and Williams? Well, I was just talking a little bit about that. You got to remember on that, and we asked Aaron about it. A lot of that is RPO and check with me and adjustments of the line and, game plan, etc. It all factors into it. And McCarthy, obviously will call a run pass, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But then Rodgers can read the defense and change up the line of scrimmage. I did ask Aaron if he had full control, as he always does, and he indicated that he did. So, it's hard to say, well, you didn't run these guys enough. Well, we don't know how many times it was called, and Aaron checked out of it. Aaron did say he wanted to get the ball to Jones more, but it just didn't line up that way. Any silver linings to take from this game? Well, Rodgers didn't get himself knocked out for the rest of the season and or his career, so that's a bonus. Yeah, 2 Super Bowls in 20 years with 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks is pitiful. Man, you need to move and cheer for another team if you think what the Packers have put on the field over the last 20 years is pitiful. Pitiful? Really? When the Cleveland Browns exist and you say pitiful for the Green Bay Packers, who are on the cusp of missing the playoffs for the first time in 9 years? That's pitiful? Man, you guys are spoiled. It's good that they're missing the playoffs. That's probably a good thing for some of you. Wow, that's bold. Will you fly to the UK for the Packers game next season? Yeah, if they play there, I'll be there. Do you think Devontae will play next week? Nope. Would you get rid of Capers if you were coach? Probably. James, we are done. Well done. True. This is the problem with the public-owned team. No one person who cares enough to clean house after a bad. See, that's silly. I'm with Murphy. I think it's the boon of it. It's the reason they've had so much success. It's the reason they've gone to the playoffs every year for the last 8 years. It's because they don't have an impulsive owner who is just going to fire somebody to make a statement, which almost never leads to anything good. Now, occasionally, obviously, things sometimes work out, but more often than not, those things are just cosmetic and they don't do anything. I mean, there are teams out there hiring and firing every 2 or 3 years, and they're perpetual losing franchises. The Packers have stayed the course with this team in place for a reason, because they're contenders every single year. What incentive does McCarthy have to keep Capers? No, that's a good question. Outside of blind loyalty, I can't give you much. But McCarthy is one of the most stubborn, most loyal coaches I've ever met. So we'll see how that works. No one remembers second place losers. It's good, David. It's good. Hadn't heard that one before. Good chance to build the talent from within. Yeah, I think that's what they're going to be doing over these next 2 weeks, probably evaluating guys for next year. And that hasn't happened in Green Bay in a long time. Who would you sign as a defensive coordinator to replace Capers? Man, I don't know. Probably Vic Fangio if he gets fired in Chicago. Do you think Aaron was going to pull it out today after getting The onside kick, yeah, I thought they were going to. I was talking to Pete Doherty. I thought for sure they were going to march down, tie it up. We're going to overtime. I thought Tom Silverstein, who called the game was going to be an overtime game in our video this week, he was going to look like a prophet, but it was not to be after that fumble. We got lucky with 2 quarterbacks. Well, the luck had nothing to do with Ron Wolf trading for Brett Favre, and it took stones the size of church bells by Ted Thompson to pull the trigger on Rodgers when he did. So, lucky? I don't know, man. It took 2 talented evaluators to bring those quarterbacks to Green Bay. Pass rush or corners in the draft? Cameron, it's got to be pass rushers. I was shocked that they didn't go pass rush in this pass draft, which was chock full of them. Montravius Adams pick, the early returns on that's probably the turning point of their draft, where they probably could have picked up some kind of pass rush help there, and chose to go with the big man, and he has done absolutely nothing for them this year. Now, that doesn't mean anything long term as far as his career goes, but for 2017, it certainly hasn't helped. Okay, there's a John Gruden mention for a possible Packers coach, and now I'm done. Thanks a lot, everyone. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. They do fly by very fast, but thanks for joining. Make sure you're checking PackersNews.com for all the latest, and we'll have everything, including stuff from Rodgers, McCarthy, the locker room, all the fallout from this loss, which, for all intents and purposes, puts the Packers out of the playoffs for the first time in 9 years. Thanks a lot, everyone. Talk to you soon.